Well, well, what has the cat dragged in today? It's a tutorial video on Unity Editor Windows. Now, this is just going to be a lightweight introduction to what Unity Editor Windows are and how to create them. There's a lot that you can do with editor windows. And if I tried to cover every possible detail, well, first of all, I don't think I could cover every detail in a video. And even if I could, it would be a gargantuan video. So this is just a lightweight introduction to the concept of editor windows. So what is an editor window? Well, it's this thing right here. It's this little count window. I'm going to close it out here so I can get that window back by coming up over here to Tools, Grasscat Count Window. It's just like any other window that I can open up that comes with Unity. I can drag it around. I can dock it wherever I want to dock it. And in this particular case, I click the button and it will count the number of mesh renderers in the active scene. Fairly simple, fairly basic. Something you might actually want to do. Say you're trying to do a performance pass and you're trying to keep your mesh render count below a certain level. You can go through levels and just click the count button and see how many renderers are in there. But how do we actually get this window up and running? How do we get this working? Well, like anytime we're messing around with the editor, we are going to want our code in an editor folder. Remember, the Unity editor namespace does not exist when you do a build. So if you have editor code that is outside of an editor folder and it doesn't have the proper compiler directives on it, it will cause your build to fail. So as a general rule of thumb, editor code, stuff it into an editor folder so it's not included with the build. As usual, there is no way to directly create any of the editor scripts. You have to just simply use create to create a C# script, which will of course be for a component inheriting from mono behavior, and then you're going to have to open up and edit it. So let's take a look at this code. Like I said, I have changed my inheritance from mono behavior to editor window. I've also added in one using statement using Unity Editor, so, save myself a tiny bit of typing. You do not have to put in the using statement. I want to be clear on that. But you do have to put in the editor window. That part's not optional. Now, as far as actually creating the window and getting the window to show, the only part of this code that's necessary is this little block right here. That's it. Everything else is just simply for the functionality that I am demoing, which is counting the number of mesh renderers in the scene. So let's take a look at this little block of code first. The method has to be static. Since this is going to be called before we have an instance of our class, it makes sense that this method must be static. It also must be public since it needs to be accessible outside of our class file. The method has to have a menu item attribute. At a minimum, this menu item attribute should have a category and then the command that is going to be used. Now, if you want to be a good citizen in the Unity community, you should put any custom windows that you generate in the Tools folder, and then in a subfolder in there, either the project name, maybe your company name, however you want to put it in there, so that way there's not a chance, or much less of a chance at least, that your editor windows are going to conflict with some other package's editor windows. So in my particular case, I'm putting everything in the category Grasscat, and then finally I have the actual command. And we can see this if I hop back over to Unity, Tools, grasscat, and then the command that will actually open up the window. To actually get the window, or create it if it doesn't exist, we have to use editor window, get window. And then you pass in here the data type to tell it which window to get, which obviously in this case is going to be same as my class name. Now, if you are using this command to open up multiple windows, you can get windows that aren't the same data type as your class. So that is perfectly legal. It's just more often than not, this data type will match this data type. Now, this particular little cast right here is not necessary. As I was typing things in, I just kind of spaced out and put the cast in there. It's not necessary. The fact that I'm using the angle bracket version of this is sufficient. And then finally, instance.show will focus the attention on that window, making it sort of the active window. The result of this is if I happen to have the window open, but just simply not focused, and I go to Tools, Grasscat, Count Window, it'll focus on the window. As if the window is closed, as I demonstrated at the start of the video, it'll open it back up. And the .show is the command that's actually focusing the attention on the window. And as far as creating an editor window, that is it. I mean, that's all you need to do to create the window. The hard part is the infinite possibilities of functionality that you can assign to the window. So as a demonstration for this, I am just simply going to go through and count the number of mesh renderers, because that could be useful information to me. Hopping back up to my variable block here for my class. Not necessary, but I like grabbing just a reference to the window when I use get window down here. I don't actually go and use this anyplace else in the rest of the code. It's just something I do by reflex, because in more complex scenarios, this can be quite useful. Something I do actually use is a reference to the current scene. So I have a Unity engine.scene management.scene current scene. So that's going to give me a reference to the current scene in the editor. I could probably do away with the Boolean, but I like bools. If I'm going to be asking a true-false question, I like asking a true-false question. So I have a Boolean has data. By default, that's going to be false. And I have my mesh count, which I'm setting to -1. So that way, if something goes catastrophically wrong, and I somehow get a -1 showing up, well, I know that something has gone catastrophically wrong. That should never, ever be visible. Now, there are a lot of methods that an editor window has. The one method that you are just practically guaranteed that you will have to use is the onGUI method, because this is how we get things like selectors and number sliders and input values and all the other fun stuff visible to the user. So I've got my onGUI and then a bunch of stuff that's going to create a very functional layout. Now, one thing you are never going to see on my channel is a tutorial on using the layout system to create well-designed, beautiful, aesthetically pleasing, and functional layouts. I have a condition called aphantasia, which means I cannot visualize at all. I am effectively mentally blind. I have no ability to visualize. So to some people, they can look at sequences of GUI layout commands and visualize what that layout's actually going to look like on screen. I can't. It's just all text to me. So making layouts is very rough on me, so I tend to focus on brute force practicality above all else. So if you're looking for videos on how to use the layout system to create really nice layouts, I'm afraid you shall have to look elsewhere. You shall not find them here. But it's functional. You can read the information. That is what I care about. Now, you will use typically a combination of GUI layout, which can also be used for custom in-game windows, and editor GUI layout, which obviously can't be used in-game. Editor GUI layout will contain stuff for like number sliders, pickers for being able to pick objects either in the assets area or your hierarchy, things like that. The GUI layout system generally contains things that you would expect to find for, well, a typical in-game UI. In fact, the GUI layout system is how you used to have to do your UI in Unity. It was painful. I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore. But sadly, for editors, we do. So starting off with a label, which I'm going to make bold. So just, telling you what is this window about. Here, notice I'm using Unity Editor, not Unity Engine, because the Editor Scene Manager, I'm sorry, said that wrong. The Engine Scene Manager does not exist right now. It doesn't have an active scene. It's the Editor Scene Manager that I need to query and ask, yo, give me the active scene. Because remember, you can have multiple scenes loaded, so I'm concerned about the active scene. So I'm grabbing that, tossing in a 15 pixel space so I have a little bit of spacing between this label and the next. Informing the player what is the active scene's name. And then I'm tossing in a button here, labeled count. And if the player presses the button, I will do the doCount method. And if hasData has been set to true, then I will inform the user how many mesh renderers there are in the active scene. Taking a look at doCount, there's nothing particularly special here. Initializing my mesh count, setting my hasData equal to true, grabbing all of the root game objects in my scene, doing a for each on that. And on each game object, I am grabbing all components of type MeshRenderer in its children. And then I'm grabbing all components of type MeshRenderer on the game object itself. Now, when I was initially writing the code, I bounced around a little bit as to which piece of information I was actually going to query on the scenes. You can't actually have more than one mesh renderer on a game object, of course, but if I was to change this to a component type that you could have multiples of, the code would still work since I am using get components. It will get every instance of this component on the game object. Overkill for a mesh renderer, but it's nice to have in there because now I can just copy paste this and put in a different data type. And it works. Not much else to say about that. I count the demo scene. I get 403 mesh renderers. I'm going to take it at its word on that one. I have no intentions of counting. Switch over here to test scene. Again, showing the whole, I clicked on the wrong spot. Showing the whole active scene. Since I switched my active scene, is now showing me active scene test. Do a count. Oh, now there's 3 mesh renderers. And that is indeed true because if I remove this and I use the hierarchy, to show everything that has a type mesh renderer on it, sure enough, I have 3 objects. Notice it's also picking up the object that is disabled. I'm not checking in my code as to whether or not the object's disabled. So it picks it up. So yeah, there are indeed 3 mesh renderers in here. So the code works. And honestly, that's it as far as editor windows. Now, the further you go down this rabbit hole, the more complex things can get. A couple of gotchas that you have to watch out for. The first gotcha. On GUI does not run constantly. That would be horrifying from a performance perspective if on GUI constantly ran. Rather, it only runs on very specific events. So if you need this to be updating constantly, you're going to have to do a variety of things. Either hook into the on repaint information, so anytime the editor window gets a repaint event, your editor, or the scene editor gets a repaint event, your window will then also redraw its GUI. You can hook into compile, anytime the code is recompiled, because if you are managing instances either to your window or references to things that exist in the hierarchy and code gets recompiled, that can break your references. So hooking into that might be useful. It's just a phenomenal number of things that you can do with these editor windows. You can interact with the asset database. You can interact with scenes. The possibilities are just wide open there. But at its core, you're inheriting from editor window, which is in the Unity editor namespace. You have to inherit from the editor window. You have to have a public static method. It does not need to be called create window. Just a common name that you will see frequently in a lot of examples. You have to have a public static method. That static method has to have the attribute menu item. And you should have the string be tools project command. At the very least, you should have category and command. And then to actually create the window or get a reference to the window, you use editor window, get window, angle bracket with the data type. And you can use .show to put the focus on that editor window. And on GUI is where you would put all of your GUI layout or editor GUI layout commands for building the user interface. And that'll do it for this video. A nice, short, relatively speaking, focused video. If you found this informative, a thumbs up would be greatly appreciated. And if you don't really feel you learned all that much, well, the thumbs down button is right next to it. Until the next video.